Welcome to Prepared for Parenthood, the podcast for hopeful, expectant, and new parents with little ones up to age 5, as well as the professionals who work with them. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Duger, a psychotherapist, author, educator, parent coach, and married mother of 2. On this show, we'll discuss everything from the most up-to-date practicals of best supporting your young children, to thriving in relationship as a family, to more surprising topics around the psychology and development of babies and children from conception through age 5. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm thrilled to have you here today. Welcome back to Prepared for Parenthood. I am so thrilled today to have our guest, Dr. Susan Highsmith, with us. She's an author, educator, counselor, and she also supported me while I was writing my dissertation many years ago. So I have a special affinity for Susan. Susan's an octogenarian, and she has earned several degrees, a PhD with a specialty in prenatal and perinatal psychology, a doctorate of divinity, and a master's degree in counseling and guidance. She's a prolific author. She's published 9 books that span the course of a lifetime. The Renaissance of Birth, Changing the Language of Childbirth, which is a primer introducing readers to the basics of prenatal and perinatal psychology. A series of 4 fairy tales titled The First Fairy Tale Books 1 through 4 that symbolically deal with conception, the formation of the heart, the development of the senses, and childbirth, each designed to be read to babies in utero. And most recently, Girls, Goddesses, and Growing Up, to enhance young women's self-esteem and help them overcome limiting patterns that they may have taken on. So welcome, Susan. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you, Stephanie.
So your passion is reading to babies in utero. What inspired that desire to encourage moms to read to their little ones while pregnant?
In 2001, I discovered Santa Barbara Graduate Institute, and that school offered graduate degree programs in prenatal and perinatal psychology. And this, for me, was the answer to a prayer. I really had wanted to earn a PhD, and I also wanted to be able to make sense of my own life. That came from some studies that I've been doing over the previous 20 years, recognizing that everything that I was dealing with and people that I knew, particularly in a counseling context, were dealing with came from really early material, patterns that were established much younger than we thought, and patterns that many times we don't even recognize. So I went to school, and what I learned there was that mommies and babies are one, that when the mom is pregnant, the baby is what Dr. David Chamberlain called a participant, not just a passenger. They're not 2 distinct individuals. They're essentially blending what's going on for each of them for the entire gestational period and even for a few months after the birth. And babies, newborns, were being studied, and what they found was that the babies recognized mother's voice. They couldn't recognize mother's voice. There was no time unless they had heard it and essentially been able to respond to it while they were in the womb. They recognized stories that they had heard while in the womb and songs as well. So this inspired me to think about writing some special books that would be designed for mommies to read to the babies while they were pregnant. And one of my favorite quotes is from Albert Einstein. And what he said is, if you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. And if you want your children to be more intelligent, read them more fairy tales. And that just said, okay, that's where I need to go in one of the next things that I undertake. So I wrote the series of 4 fairy tales.
I love what you're speaking to about pregnant moms and their babies in utero being, they are 2, but they're also 1. They're really sharing that lived space together for 9+ months. And in that fourth trimester after baby is born, there's still a highly symbiotic relationship there.
Indeed.
As research continues to discover and show that what impacts the mama impacts the baby, and
That,
what's impacting the field around the mama is also impacting the baby. And
that,
so it's so incredible and so amazing to think about. It's so miraculous, all that's happening. And what a beautiful time to be able to read to them, picking up that thread that Albert Einstein shared about reading fairy tales. What is it about fairy tales specifically that leads to a greater understanding of the world?
Fairy tales are a very ancient form of storytelling. And many, many truths are woven into these metaphorical, symbolic kinds of tales that connect with a child on a very deep level. From my perspective, on a spiritual level, they don't have to understand it exactly. We don't have to spell it out. We don't have to explain the science. They get it. And we all do, actually, which is why fairy tales are so very powerful and still a form of wonderful communication for us, even as adults. But certainly, adult to child is a wonderful way to help them awaken to, we might call it the reality of life, but I want to be careful in using that word reality, because we often think that what we see, what we take in through our senses is the reality. And from a spiritual perspective, it's very misleading. The senses can really, I can say, trick us. They can fool us into thinking that what we're seeing is actually true. So I can give you an example of that. I can look into your beautiful eyes and I could say, oh, Stephanie, you and I had a disagreement years ago. Actually, we did not. I'm making this up. And I would then hold that perception of you maybe for a long, long time, years. And that, as you mentioned, the field that surrounds you, that clouds the field between us. I can also look into your eyes, and no matter what our interaction has been, and the truth of it is it's been fabulous, I can look at you and I can say, Stephanie is a beautiful, we'll use these words, child of God. She is a product of creation that is magnificent, individual, unique, and absolutely her own woman that I admire and love. And if I hold that, our interaction differs now. And what we are teaching children through fairy tales are those kinds of lessons, to be able to see beyond the physical to the beauty and truth of who people really are.
Susan, your dissertation essentially was about how first-time mothers' expectations of motherhood might be impacted by consciousness. Can you briefly share what you discovered in that research, and also how it contributed to your beliefs that pregnant women should be reading to their babies in utero?
I had this hypothesis, this idea that maybe women would either manifest, they would create the birth that they really wanted, or they might not. What might the differences be? What I did was I took a small group of women, one at a time, and these are called prima paras, first-time mummies, and I would interview them before the baby was born, while they were pregnant, and then after the baby was born, in a very few days, as soon as I could get to them, I would go back and interview them again. And I was asking them, did this whole process occur the way you had envisioned? I recorded the conversations and I went over them. I transcribed them. I was very wrapped up in what the women were saying. And what I found from my own work in consciousness, which has continued to this day, is that there can be hidden fears or even expressed fears, as I found in the transcripts, that could sabotage a woman's ability to have the pregnancy and then birth that she would really like to have, perhaps a natural birth, and something happens that there are interventions used, perhaps all the way to the point of having a cesarean section. That was becoming very clear in my own research. And then other things that I was studying as well, some of the papers that I could read, were telling me essentially the same kinds of things. But my own research was very powerful for me because I knew these women and they were all magnificent. And some of them were able to accomplish exactly what they wanted with the birth of their baby, and others did not. And what was the difference? And that's why I titled the dissertation, The Impact of Consciousness, because what is it you're thinking about? Now, to step back from that a moment, let me just say that there is no universal, good, well accepted definition for what consciousness is. And so I have come to some conclusions of my own, but to be awake and aware is certainly a facet of consciousness. When we are awake, when we're speaking as we are right now, Stephanie, we're conscious of this. But there are things going on at an implicit level, under the radar, that we don't really know about. And those things can sabotage our success in many, many aspects of our lives, which is why it's valuable to look at these various things and to be able to view them in a way that is very loving and accepting and recognizing where all this stuff comes from, depending upon your belief system, but looking at how we are programmed, in my opinion, from the moment of conception onward. And there are other authorities who would agree with that. So consciousness can affect the birth process and the birthing process. I believe that women can give birth more consciously. And when they begin to access an altered state of consciousness, which is a very healthy thing to do, it's just our brains vibrate at different frequencies. They can tell this through neurofeedback, biofeedback. It's been going on for decades. And women can access a state of consciousness that can transform their experience of giving birth. That's why hypnobirthing works so well. Women just learn how to relax, to breathe, to let go of anything they've already processed, any fears that might come up, and they recognize that their bodies are designed to give birth easily.
So I have so many questions coming up, Susan. I love all this stuff. I kind of geek out on it. So given that, we also might assume that the baby has their own consciousness, right? And so
That's the good next place to go to.
yeah, so I imagine that babies coming onto the planet might have their own ideas about how they're going to arrive here. And I want to believe that they would like to arrive in the most easeful, loving way possible. And maybe some of them don't. I don't know. Maybe some of them choose a harder birth because that's part of their journey. I don't know. But if the pregnant mom is coming into a birth, there are the things that we can control to some extent, right? Our own belief system, processing previous traumas, things like that, to help make a birth hopefully more easeful going into it. And then there are the pieces that sometimes are a little less in our control. Maybe we can't necessarily control whatever the baby's consciousness is. We can probably impact it by having all these positive thoughts and connecting with the baby and trying to maybe come up with a plan. Like, okay, we're going to have this really big experience. How should we do this? How can we make this the easiest arrival for you, the easiest experience for me, so we can really start off on the right foot together once you're in the world? And then there's all the stuff that's happening outside of that, right? So in the field, if someone were to give birth in the hospital, as a lot of people do, there is the consciousness of all of the healthcare workers, the environment that you're in, your support partner who may have their own fears, things like that. So I'm so curious. What are your thoughts about how those pieces might play into everything?
You and I are just totally on the same page. Yes, all of this plays. I think each of us has a divine plan for our lives, and we don't know exactly what's going on for the baby. But number one, recognizing the baby's consciousness is really helpful. That's why reading is so good for them, is because you're acknowledging that there's somebody really there. Pictures of siblings kissing mommy's belly, or daddy tapping and the baby taps back. All of these things are telling us that there's an intuitive knowing that these babies are conscious. So how do mommies interact with that baby? And many Aboriginal societies do this very intuitively. They don't have the science, but they know. And so the baby can contribute. So you can begin to listen to the baby, to ask it questions, and to receive mentally telepathic thoughts. Sometimes children, I have heard from some people that I've talked to, will tell you what they'd like their name to be. With regard to the actual birth, you can practice. This is what performing athletes do. They envision in their minds what it's going to be like, and you can enroll the baby in this process. For example, a baby in a breech position, if you work with them, talk to them, soothe them, let them know that it is safer for them to come out head first as opposed to feet first, then the baby will often turn. It's quite extraordinary, the communication that is possible between a mother and the baby that she is carrying.
It's beautiful to think about. And I'm curious, how early do you think this communication might be able to start with this little one?
Before conception, you start talking to the spirit of this child that you are inviting in. Have the conception be as conscious as possible. More than half of our babies in the United States today are conceived essentially unintended, meaning I didn't want a baby right now, or I didn't ever want a baby at all. If that occurs, what some parents are reflecting to us is that they discover that, oh, this is really okay. I really love the baby. At that moment, absolutely tell the baby that you love it, you're welcoming the baby, and you are encouraging all the development to occur at exactly the right way at the right time. We don't know exactly what that is, but this development of the baby in the womb is a reflection of their consciousness. We don't say, okay, develop a heart today, develop a liver today. We don't have that kind of awareness, but the baby knows what needs to happen next, or some beautiful, divine, creative source is directing what's going on there. And we can become in tune with that simply by starting with humming, singing, reading, telling stories to the baby while it's in the womb, letting it know how glad we are to bring this new life into the physical world. It ain't easy out here. We can make this journey, the gestational period and the birth itself, far easier with our consciousness. They're going to pick up everything anyway by making them happier thoughts, more welcoming thoughts, ensuring that you understand that this lovely new spirit is coming in through your own presence, that this is a gift, and that we want this process to be as safe, as you called it, easy, pleasant, happy, joyful as it can possibly be.
We've been speaking today with Dr. Susan Highsmith. She is an author, educator, and counselor, and all around lovely human being. I'm so grateful that you are able to be here today, Susan, and
Thank you.
share some of your wisdom with our listeners. Thank you so much for being here.
You are so welcome.
Thank you so much for listening to the Prepared for Parenthood podcast today. I hope you found this episode educational, informational, and conversational, and that you'll join me again for another episode soon. If you enjoyed listening to today's podcast, I'd very much appreciate if you would rate, review, and subscribe. If you're interested in more information related to today's podcast, or are looking for parent coaching or courses, you can find my information in the show notes or online at preparedforparenthood.com.